Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Rise of Kyoshi chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 9, which is called Desperate Measures. This one's a shorter chapter than obviously chapter 7, and I definitely describe it as the calm before the storm here. Chapter 10 is really going to change things. It's a very eventful chapter. This is more of just, the last kind of nice thing in a way to happen for a while in the book. As we see, a summary of this chapter would be Kyoshi notices things are changing in the mansion. She's being treated differently now that she's kind of officially an avatar candidate. Then she has a firebending test to see if she is a firebender with Jianzu and Heiran. It fails, so it builds up, Jianzu's frustration in the background. The desperate measures are obviously relating to him. Then she has it to Kyoshi. Yun comes over to Kyoshi, kind of apologizes for being kind of silent and annoyed with her, and they kind of have a talk again, kind of reconnect, make up, and we start to see a little bit of more of, the sort of romantic connection. But there is a little bit of a romantic tension between the two of them that's being set up. And the very end of the chapter, and it's the setup for the next eventful chapter, which is Kyoshi and Yun are going to be going with Jianzu on a special mission, a fun mission apparently, but we'll see how that plays out. So, let's get into specifics. So, yeah, Kyoshi wakes up, finds that everything is different, she's being fed like a noble. The people who she was previously, I suppose, sort of friends with, or at least on the same level at, are now calling her mistress, Her waiter checked back in, his mistress finished. "Reen, I went to your birthday party," Kyoshi said. "I chipped in for that comb you're wearing." And she just says, You're not to show up for work anymore. Master Jianzu wants you by the training grounds in an hour. What am I meant to do until then?" "Whatever mistress wishes." And Kyoshi's like, "I have leisure time? I could just do what I want?" So she's really shocked by this. So things have changed completely for Kyoshi. Then we quickly cut to the actual firebender test with Jianzu and Heiran. And we basically get the idea that what this is, it's a test that is performed on mainly newborn children in the Fire Nation to test to see if they're firebenders, because there is a need to know early on, because fire is obviously dangerous. And Heiran sort of jokes, but there's a little bit of truth to it as well, that they need to know early, just in case the child burns the neighborhood down or something like that. So I like that. Now, what the test is, how it's performed, how it works, is basically you dry out the room. So I think the idea is just a firebender uses fire a lot in the room, really dries it out. Then they get this kindling. They describe it as being like cotton and what is it? Shredded birch bark and cotton mixed with some special oils. So the idea here is that it is like the most flammable thing you could probably have in a dry room. Any slight spark is going to light this thing right up. So the test is that you put this really incredible flammable kindling at the breath of a newborn child, or in this case Kyoshi, and them just breathing normally should be enough of a spark, if they're a firebender, to ignite it. That is the spark of a firebender. It's the power of the breath of a firebender, the breath of life. The fire, that's their inner fire. That should light it straight up. And Heiran even says at the end that it should only take a few seconds, even for a newborn child. But they wait 10 minutes with Kyoshi and it still hasn't worked. And so we get this situation where Jianzu, leaves, basically. Jianzu didn't answer. He turned around and stormed out of the room, slamming his fist into the frame as he left. The earth-bending discs stacked by the door exploded into dust. So everything going wrong for Jianzu. He wants this to be right. He wants to know who is the Avatar. He's placed so much faith in Yun, and if it's not Yun, and it is Kyoshi, at least he can then switch over to Kyoshi, but at this point he doesn't know who is the Avatar. They both have claims, and while I think for him, while it would be frustrating if it turned out to be Kyoshi because of how much work he put into Yun and how much they've done, at least Kyoshi's right there, but he doesn't know if it's either of them, and you can sense his frustration building, and why he's resorting to more and more desperate measures to try and get Yun to firebend, to now test Kyoshi. It would have been so simple in a way if it was just, oh, Kyoshi's a firebender, that's it, that confirms it. But it's not. It's not simple at all, and for him, who's devoted himself so much to this, he blames himself for what happened with Karuk and the world sort of not having its avatar right now in the water cycle, and it being on the Earth cycle. He wants to make sure for sure that the Earth avatar here is the best avatar that they can be, that they go back to that era of Yang Chen, and if it's under his leadership, so be it, and he wants that to happen. The power is great, but we're going to see him, those desperate measures are going to begin to get worse and worse, and he's going to lose sort of control of it, and we've already seen that he's made some darker decisions in the past with the whole Gravedigger of Zulu Pass thing. Now will we see some of that stuff begin to come out, and that's exactly what we're going to see as we see Jianzu's sort of descent in a way. Like, would you call him full-on villain? Maybe not so much, but you understand why he gets to the point of being such like an antagonist and why Kyoshi is so against him, as we'll get to see. But this is just the setup for that before he's truly like lost himself, basically, in a way. Next scene then is Yoon finds Kyoshi, and what I like about this scene is that there's a lot kind of unsaid. Like, he apologizes to her straight away and says, Kyoshi, I'm sorry, I know you never meant for this to happen. And there's that sense of just like, obviously for him, he didn't talk to her. He left with Rangi, and they were annoyed that Kyoshi didn't tell them. But clearly in his time alone, he's reflected on this and realized that, look, it's frustrating for him and that things might change if Kyoshi's a candidate and it turns out to be her. But it's not her fault. If she didn't want this, she didn't choose this. She just happened to have been like discovered as an avatar candidate here, and it's not her fault. And that he shouldn't be angry at her because she doesn't want this just as much as kind of he doesn't want this, and so he feels that like there's no point in blaming her, so let's just go back to the way things are. So he apologizes, and they get their friendship back on track, and it's a really nice scene, kind of maturity in a way from Yoon, and it's something that was much needed for Kyoshi to have like one of her friends back at this time where everything is changing for her. So Kyoshi does note that Rangi doesn't know that she never meant for this to happen, and he just says, Rangi will come around, she's a person of faith, a true believer. It's hard for someone like her to deal with uncertainty. You have to be a little patient with her. And he just notes that, I was acting like Sifu for a second there. It's him I'm really worried about. So Yoon is actually worried more about Jianzu in all of this, that things are going to change for him, and he notes that, determining who should train the avatar and how is a cutthroat business. You think the masters of the world are these benevolent, selfless old men and women, but it turns out that some of them simply want to use the avatar's power and reputation to profit themselves. And this relates in a way to sort of the style of things that Jianzu was talking about with Kyoshi in the previous chapter, and she's seeing that now with what Yoon is relaying to her. He says it's especially bad in the Earth Kingdom. We call the prominent elders sages, but they're not true spiritual leaders like in the Fire Nation. They're more like powerful officials with all the politicking they do. So that's a nice reveal. We knew that there were sages in like the other nations, but we always got this sense like, is there something special about the Fire Sages, or are they all the same? I think most people probably lean in the direction of they're all the same, but now we actually learn the Fire Sages are noted as being the properly spiritual ones, for sure. And that makes sense. Everything we know about the Fire Sages points to that completely. The Earth Sages, though, we are learning here, while there may be some element of spirituality to them for that position, they're actually just noted kind of elder important people who are sort of doing some politicking. Jianzu is really the perfect example of a sage in terms of what he is doing. He is not necessarily from noble blood or anything like that, but he has this important position and is considered a sage, which is this sort of pseudo-important position, and through all of his personal loyalty deals across the world, has developed this sense of power across the world. So that's an interesting one to know. And this is when Kyoshi brings up you've been working so hard with Jianzu to make all these deals happen. If it's me, what happens to those deals? And he just notes that, I think nearly every treaty and peace agreement Sifu and I brokered will become null and void. I've made so many unwritten judgments too. If people found out I wasn't the avatar who presided over their dispute, and only some street urchin from Makapu, they would never abide by the outcome. So Kyoshi's just like, great, all these amazing deals that the new avatar is making are going to be, broken just because it potentially might be me. And yeah, and she hates the fact more than anything that she almost forced Yoon to talk about his bloodline. Basically, it says here. For as long as she'd known him, Yoon had staunchly refused to talk about his blood relations, but the reverent way he looked at Jeonju, despite any arguments or bouts or harsh discipline, made it very clear he had no one else. Jeonju was both his mentor and his family. And she notes that maybe that was why she and Yoon got along so well, is because they both have those issues with their parents of not wanting to talk about their past, and there's a connection because they're sort of on their own in a way. So that's really nice to get, again, kind of connect the two of them together. Then we get the little romantic kind of hint here of the tension between them romantically. Yoon notes, are those fire lilies over there? And Kyoshi immediately like blushes at the mention of fire lilies. And then we get the explanation of why just a certain flower would cause this sort of an incident between the two of them. It was an inside reference that only the two of them shared. Rangi didn't know. She hadn't been around in the gifting room 8 months ago while Kyoshi arranged a vast quantity of fire lilies sent by an admiral in the Fire Navy, one of Heiran's friends. Yoon had spent the afternoon watching Kyoshi work. Against every scrap of her better judgment, she allowed him to lie on the floor and rest his head in her lap while she plucked deformed leaves and trimmed stems to the right length. Had anyone caught the two of them like that, there would have been a scandal that not even the Avatar could have recovered from. That day, entranced by Yoon's upside-down features, dappled with the flower petals she'd teasingly sprinkled over his face, she'd almost lain down and kissed him, and he knew it because he'd almost reached up and kissed her. They never spoke of it afterward, the shared impulse that had nearly crashed both of their carriages. It was too well, each had their duties, was a good way to put it. That moment did not fit anywhere among their responsibilities. And then they just note that since that moment, anytime they're both in the same place as fire lilies, they both kind of just have this awkward, like, looking at each other like fire lilies, that moment we almost kissed. And the idea seems to be that if not for sort of the position that they're sort of both in, of Yoon being the Avatar to be and Kyoshi just being a sort of servant in the mansion, if not for the gulf in their kind of responsibilities, if they were just normal teens, they probably would be in a relationship. That's kind of the idea here. That's how kind of close they are. And so there's that sort of romantic tension kind of bubbling between them that was sort of hinted at before, but now made very, very clear here. So it makes it very clear. She has feelings for Yoon. We also know she has feelings for Rangi. So, anyone worried about like the book addressing her sexuality and stuff like that, it's right here. They're very open about it from the very beginning of her being like attracted to both of these characters, both Yoon and Rangi. And then right at the end he mentions, we're late, I was supposed to find you and bring you to Sifu. He said he has something fun for us planned this afternoon. Kyoshi's like, I can't, I have work. And he's like, Yoon is like, no offense Kyoshi, but I think you've pretty much been fired. Now get off that maybe Avatar rear of yours, we're going on a trip. So that's the setup for the trip of the next part. They're going with Jeonju somewhere, and apparently it's going to be fun. Spoilers, it's not fun, but we'll get to that in the next chapter. But yeah, that's this chapter in, I think, all the discussion that there needs to be. I thought this was a good chapter. It's short, but it accomplished exactly what it needed to, showing Kyoshi's reaction to her, different surroundings now that she's kind of out in the open as an Avatar candidate. The firebending test was an important one to build up the frustration for Jeonju of nothing working to confirm which one of them is or isn't the Avatar, and then especially getting Yoon and Kyoshi back on side with each other, of like their back being kind of best friends again going into this trip, was an important one, especially to get across the closeness of the two of them, and also setting up the closeness of Yoon and Jeonju as well, that Yoon looks up to Jeonju so much and is willing to put like his feelings about things kind of above his own, because that's how important he is to him. And that's all going to be important for what Jeonju does in the next chapter. So that's great setup, I think, in this chapter here. But yeah, that's my thoughts on chapter 9 of the book. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.